Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemel, and we're here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about business and professional matters and wealth building, all of the whole financial side of life. He says as his email makes a ding. I always forget to shut my email down. So today is our monthly economic echoes, where we look at the economic data to see how it impacts us as individuals, recognizing, as I've mentioned many times before, none of us lives a life of the national economy. It may affect business more broadly, but each of us lives a localized life. And so, for example, the national CPI, Consumer Price Index, really doesn't mean anything to us because our spending patterns and our localities make our experience different. So we're meeting today on November 20th. So it's basically a couple weeks after the election. So the information we're going to be talking about won't really have been affected by the election, I think, yet. We'll probably start seeing that next month. So that'll be something interesting to look at. But let's get started right away. So going to go ahead and share my screen as I always do. And let's see, here we go. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is take a look at the Consumer Price Index. I'm going to maximize this so you can see it better. Okay, and so inflation in October nationwide went up 0.2%, seasonally adjusted, and it rose 2.6% over the last 12 months. Now that's up a little bit from September, when it went up 2.4%. So this calls into question, the Federal Reserve has been easing interest rates. They dropped 0.5% in September. They dropped another 0.25% last month, I believe it was. And so I think this is calling into question this easing of interest rates. And it may be that I know I've read there are some calls that the interest rate decreases by the Fed should stop, at least for now, especially with inflation ticking up, because the target inflation rate is 2%. But we'll have to see how that plays out. So, and you'll notice, by the way, that here's the 2.6% rate. So major categories: food went up 2.1%, energy went down almost 5%, but all other things, less food and energy, which are the two most volatile, actually went up 3.3%. So that's a pretty, it's still a pretty hot rate. So if we drill down into food, so as we saw last month, food eaten at home went up a little over 1%, whereas food eaten away from home went up 0.4%. Almost 4%. This is year over year. Okay, so what went up the most? Food at home, meat, poultry, fish. In other words, proteins, eggs went up almost 2%. Dairy products over 1%. Fruits and vegetables just under 1%. Alcoholic beverages went up almost 2%. That doesn't bode well for my show tomorrow. But and other foods at home, 0.4%. Cereals and bakery goods went up about 1%. So you can see that if you're eating this is similar to last month, a meat-heavy diet, you probably a meat and alcohol-heavy diet, you probably experienced, higher inflation, all other things being equal. Now, looking at the food away from home, so you can see that both full service and limited service went up basically about the same, 3.7, 3.8%. So no matter where you ate out, your food costs went up about 4%. Now let's look at energy. Okay, so energy commodities went down 12.4%. We'll look into the details of that in a moment, whereas energy services went up 4%. Okay, so that's why overall energy didn't go down as much. So fuel oil went down 21%. Okay, so if you are in the Northeast where you heat your house using fuel oil, that was a big drop. And that could have made it seem to you like, well, gosh, I don't see how inflation could have gone up. I feel a lot better. But for those of us here on the West Coast where fuel oil doesn't really mean a whole lot to us, we didn't experience that drop. Now, gasoline did go down 12%. But I don't think in California, by the way, it went down nearly that much. So California gasoline prices tend to be much stickier than other places in the country, but still, a good drop. So that's in terms of energy commodities. Energy services, okay, electricity went up 4.5%, and natural gas went up 2%. So if you don't drive, and a lot of people don't drive, or if you drive very little like me, right? So, you may not have seen your energy prices go down. They, whereas, if you use electricity, like if you have an all electric home, so the cost of operating your home went up more than it would have for somebody like me, who I have gas heating, I have a gas cooktop, and an electric, electric range or electric oven. I mean, so again, you can see how these differences play out. Okay, and then all other categories. So here's this is interesting. Commodities, less food and energy went down 1%. So what do those include? Okay, apparel cost almost unchanged. New vehicles went down a little over 1%. Used vehicles went down, it looks like about 2.4%, something like that. Yeah, about 2.4, no, 3.4%, it looks like. Okay. Let's see, what is this? This is medical care commodities went up about 1%. Alcoholic beverages went up 1.6%. And tobacco products went up 7%. Okay, so an incentive to quit smoking, I guess, or to quit vaping or chewing tobacco. Okay, so kind of a mixed group here as to what happened with commodities, excluding food and energy, as opposed to services. Okay, all services went up. So shelter, housing went up almost 5%, medical care almost 4%, and transportation services almost 8%. So here's the thing. Most of us, these are factors for almost everybody. We all need a place to live. We all need to get around, and we all need medical care of some kind or another. So when you look at the cost of services, how high they went up, as opposed to commodities, where if you don't smoke, okay, and you didn't buy a car, so the way you experienced inflation is very different than someone who does smoke and bought a car. Okay, so for going back to commodities. So, for example, if you didn't buy a car in October, right, which is what held down the increase in commodities, you almost for sure experienced a higher rate of inflation than you would have if you had bought a car, in essence. Okay, so that's why it's so important to look at these details. Okay, so that's on the national front. Okay, now let's look at the local inflation. I always use Los Angeles just because that's where I am, but you can use your own location. Okay, so here in Los Angeles, so prices were unchanged from a month ago at 3%. So the Los Angeles area, which is Los Angeles, Long Beach, Anaheim, inflation was essentially flat from a month ago. Okay, and food went up 0.2%. Food at home went up 0.1%. Food away from home 0.3%. But overall, food prices are up 3.5%, led by higher meat, poultry, fish, and eggs, 5%. Okay, food away from home over the last year went up 5% in Los Angeles. Okay, energy went up 0.6%. And this was to higher natural gas at 4.6% and electricity at 1.3%, whereas gasoline declined 0.6%. So there was a small downtick in the price of gasoline, which held down energy inflation, against higher natural gas and electricity prices. Now, energy prices declined 12.4% over the last year, and that was due to a 20.5% drop in gasoline. Okay, whereas electricity prices and natural gas were roughly even with where they were a year ago. Okay, and so then for all items less food and energy, medical care went up 1%, shelter was about even at 0.2%, and new and used vehicles went down 2%, and education and communication went down about 2% as well. And so you can see that there was some more moderation in these categories. Overall, though, the increase in costs, less food and energy here in Los Angeles went up 4.3%, due primarily to higher medical care costs at 8.5% and shelter costs of over 5%. Okay, these were partially offset by decreases in the price of new and used cars and furnishings. But if you didn't buy a car over the last year or household furnishings, so then that doesn't matter. That you're experiencing much higher inflation living in Los Angeles. Now, what I would recommend for your local area is just search CPI for the city or county that you're in, and that'll give you your particular index, but that will give you greater insight into why you seem to be experiencing inflation that may feel different than the national average. Okay, so next we're going to look at, I think it's personal income. Yeah, personal income. Wait, what happened to? Yeah, for some reason the national personal income wasn't showing up. Okay, so. Oh, okay, yeah, okay, there we go. Anyway, okay, so looking at personal income or earnings, okay, first of all on the national level, so you can see that they went up a penny on an hourly basis from 11.23 to 11.24, which works out to be a little bit more than 47 cents per weekly in terms of weekly earnings. Nothing to get too excited about. And average weekly hours. Average weekly hours stayed flat as it has for the last several months. I mean, for year over year at 34.3 hours. That's the average number of hours that people worked. So there was really very little change in real average hourly earnings which is adjusted for inflation. So in October, real average hourly earnings went up 0.1%. If you felt that, you're like the princess and the pea who can feel the pea put under 20 mattresses. It's so small. And indeed, so for year over year, okay, real average earnings have gone up 1.4%. So they have gone up a little bit, but not a whole lot. Okay, so about 1.5%, and nothing to write home about and be thinking, hey, it's going to be a jolly Christmas. Unfortunately, probably not. Okay, so now let's look at. Well, actually, we looked at personal income by state last time, so I'm going to skip that. If you want to take a look at that, you can go to last month's show to see it broken down by state. They only update the personal income by state figures every quarter, and so instead of repeating it on the 2 months where it hasn't been updated, I typically skip it. Okay, so next let's look at unemployment. And why am I not seeing? Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is unemployment on the national level. So October 2024, the unemployment rate is 4.1%, which is the same as September, 4.1%. Okay, so no change in the unemployment picture. Now for men 20 years and over, unemployment went from 3.7 to 3.9, so it did go up a little bit. So that would tend to indicate, that employment for women 20 years and older went down. So they were 3.6% in September, down. Well, no, I guess even at 3.6% for October. Okay, so unemployment went up for men 20 years and over, but not enough to change the overall unemployment picture. Okay, so for teens, unemployment also went down from 14.3% to 13.8%. So it went down 0.5%. So October was a good month for teen employment. Okay, and now let's look at demographics. So unemployment among white Americans went from 3.6 to 3.8, so it went up a little bit. Okay, for Black Americans, it went from 5.7% in September. Okay, stayed even for October at 5.7%. For Asians, let's see, where's Asians? Here we go. Okay, so for Asians, it went from. Okay, I got to get rid of this so I can get to the Asian. Okay, so it went from 4.1% down to 3.9%. So a little bit of an improvement for Asians, not a whole lot. And finally, Hispanics or Latinos. So it was unchanged at a little over 5%. Okay, so overall, the unemployment picture nationwide for various demographic groups and such didn't change a whole lot. Oops, I should have increased the size on that so you could see it better. But in any event, it didn't. That the national unemployment rate didn't change a whole lot. So let's look now at unemployment rates by states, and let's see where we. Okay, here we go. And let's make this bigger so you can see it better. Okay, so the unemployment rate by states. Again, perennially, South Dakota has the lowest unemployment rate, 1.9% for October, and the highest. This time, District of Columbia and Nevada are tied at 5.7%, with California coming in third at 5.4%. So those three have been jockeying it out for the bottom position for quite some time. Now, for those of you who have been following the news, the governor of South Dakota. I think it's the governor of South Dakota. No, I take that back. It was governor of North Dakota was nominated for a cabinet post. So, presumably North Dakota is going to stay on the good employment path that it's been on for a while. And you can see that the states with the lowest unemployment rate. So let's see, the median unemployment rate it looks like it's around about 3.4%. So anything like 3% and lower, it really is kind of a mixed bunch. Everywhere from Hawaii, Alabama, Mississippi, Virginia, Wisconsin, and Maine are all at 2.9%. So that's the South, the Pacific, the Northeast, and the Midwest, right? All at 2.9%. At 3%, you've got Connecticut, Iowa, and Maryland. Again, you've got the Northeast, you've got the Midwest, and you've got the South. So those are the areas of highest employment. The West, okay, where we're talking about, for example, Arizona, 3.6%, Oregon, 4.4%, New Mexico, 4.3%. I mentioned California already, 5.4%, Nevada, 5.7%. All of these states, and where's Washington? Let's see if I can find Washington real quickly. Washington is not the outlier. So, here's Washington, 4.7%. So the Pacific Northwest and the Southwest all have high unemployment rates. It looks like the lowest is Arizona with 3.6%, which is, above the median number. So, what's going on with that? Well, there is somewhat of a political divide between how states in the Pacific Northwest and the Southwest are governed, as opposed to states certainly in the Midwest and the Southeast. Okay, that wouldn't necessarily account for the Northeast, which politically tends to mirror the Pacific Northwest and the Southwest more. But it would seem that without getting too deep into the politics, that the states with the strongest economies in general tend to be in the Southeast and the Midwest, with obviously some outliers, Vermont and Hawaii and Connecticut being the most outstanding among them. Other than that, all the rest are in the Southeast and the Midwest. So that gives you an indication in terms of what you may be experiencing, unemployment wise, where the strongest regions are, and if you're thinking of relocating, where the best job prospects appear to be. Okay, so now I'm just going to stop the screen sharing on that, and we're going to go to the labor force participation rate. Okay, and go ahead and make this larger so you can see this better. Okay, so the civilian labor force participation rate, it was 62.7% in September, down to 62.6%. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that overall, fewer people are working despite the fact that the unemployment rate was essentially unchanged. Okay, because one thing, sometimes what we see is the labor force we see that unemployment goes down, but we also see the labor force participation rate went down, and that shows why the unemployment rate went down, because the two are tied very closely together, because the unemployment rate only reflects people who are looking for a job who don't have a job. Okay, so the fewer people looking for a job, i.e. the lower the civilian labor force participation rate, the lower the unemployment rate will be, relatively speaking. Okay, so that's the total. Now, for For men 20 years and older, the let me see, yeah, the labor force participation rate was essentially unchanged. It went up 0.1% to 70.5%, as opposed to women 20 years and older, where the labor force participation rate went from 58.9 to 58.7. So it went down about 0.2%. So these are not big changes, by the way. They're not huge changes, but they're changes kind of at the margins. And let's see. And then the teen, let's see here. Oops. Okay, that's right. Okay, there you go. So the teen labor force participation rate went from 37.2% in September to 35.8%. So it went down almost 1.5%. So if you recall, the unemployment rate went down for teens. That's why. It's not that more teens are working, it's that more teens gave up looking for work. And so that drove the unemployment rate down for that drove the unemployment rate down for teens, right? That's why these two factors need to be looked at together to really understand what's going on. Okay, so now let's look at by demographic. So the labor force participation rate for white Americans went from 62.4 to 62.2. Okay, so it dropped a little bit. Again, that's really a change at the margins. For Black Americans, it went from 62.9. Well, it stayed flat at 62.9, so no change there. For Asian Americans, it went from 65.3 to 65.5. Again, just really a change at the margins. And Hispanics, who you can see historically have the highest labor force participation rate, it went from 67.4 to 66.9. So a 5% drop. Wait, let me just make sure I got that right. Yeah, a 0.5% drop among Hispanics or Latinos, and that's a big factor. And I would bet you that it was Hispanic teens caused a lot of that drop, and that's why we saw unemployment drop among teens. It was, I would bet you, it was due primarily to Hispanic teens, and that's why we saw that change. Okay, so what does this mean to you as an individual? Well, I mean, over if you're not a teenager, the employment picture is still very strong. An unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is still very good. So I don't think from a job standpoint, there's going to be there's a lot of look. The adage goes, as I've mentioned before, a recession is when your neighbor loses a job. A depression is when you lose a job, of course. But overall, the labor picture remains pretty strong, and so this is why I think you're still seeing labor unions, for example, pressing very hard to organize. They feel they have a lot more leverage, and so this bodes well, for the future for those of us who are still working. Okay, next, let's look at employment by industry. Okay, so here we go, employment by industry. Okay, so these are national employment statistics. And October is following the trend we've been seeing all year, which is the big gains in employment are happening in private education and healthcare services, 57,000 more jobs in October, up 0.2%, and in government with 40,000 new jobs, again, up 0.2%. And the biggest losers are manufacturing, which went down 46,000 jobs, 0.4%, and business services, which also declined, which declined 47,000 jobs, 4.2%. So the employment picture by industry has been showing the same trend it's been showing all year. I'm going to click to the 12-month view. Oops, I've got to make this bigger for you to see. Okay, so looking at the 12-month view now, you can see that increases in employment over the last 12 months is really due. There's almost 1 million new jobs in private education and health services, and 500,000 in government. So it's really government spending that has been funding job growth over the last 12 months. Now let's go back to the 1-month picture just real quickly, and you'll see private educational services, 6,000 jobs, but it's healthcare, 52,000 new jobs. That's really where the growth is. And healthcare is a largely government funded factor. Okay. And all areas of healthcare saw increases in employment. Okay. And then on the government side, okay, so the federal government didn't do a lot of hiring in October, but state and local governments certainly did. And you can see here's local government education, pretty big hiring, as well as local government excluding education. And then for state governments, so you can see state government education way up, and state government employment excluding education also went up quite a bit. So you can see there that really what's fueling growth. Now, on the manufacturing side, you can see durable goods employment went down. Automobile companies are struggling as they, are involved in the electric vehicle transition. Consumers are not buying electric vehicles, and so they're scaling back on their production. Okay. Here you go, transportation equipment manufacturing. You can see that's way down. And everything else, not a whole lot of change. So it's really transportation equipment manufacturing that drove the loss in manufacturing jobs. In non-durable goods, okay, plastics and rubber manufacturing went down, food manufacturing went up. And besides that, everything else was, not super big changes here, less than 1,000 jobs on all these other ones. Okay. All right. So, and then the other big loser this month was professional and business services. And you can see professional, scientific, and technical went down just a little bit, 1,500 jobs. Management of companies and enterprises went up 3,400 jobs. The real loss is in administrative and support, waste management, and remediation, almost 50,000 jobs. That's where the losses were. And you'll note, by the way, that these are the lower paid jobs. So management jobs, higher paid jobs, professional and management went up or down just a little bit. Lower income jobs are the ones that really went down. Okay. And it wasn't waste management and remediation. It was administrative and support services. So businesses are, laying off or firing support staff. I think they were tightening their belts in October. Now let's compare this let's look at the 1-year picture. So again, you can see that private healthcare, almost 700,000 new jobs, and social services, almost 25,000 new jobs. These are both driven primarily by government spending. And again, in healthcare, all sectors saw job increases. Okay, and in social assistance, individual and family services led the way, but all factors went higher. Okay, and then let's go back to okay. And then on the government side, the federal government, almost 50,000 new jobs, state governments, 129,000 new jobs, local governments, almost 310,000 new jobs. Okay. And, education looks like it's about 40% versus non-education at the local level, and at the state level, again, same kind of thing. Education about 40%, or maybe maybe about 40% versus 60% for non-education. So that's really where we're seeing the big changes. Now, manufacturing year over year has lost jobs both in durable and non-durable goods. And you can see only in a couple sectors did year over year did, and this is interesting. So transportation manufacturing equipment, 11,000 new jobs year over year. Obviously, there was a much bigger gain until last month, October. And then non-metallic mineral products, 6,400. All the rest of manufacturing declined. Okay, so you can see why overall manufacturing is down. Now, construction is up in all sectors year over year, whereas you'll note, it was specialty trades are still up. So the 12-month trend in construction is pretty similar to the 1-month trend. Okay. And then the other one we looked at was professional and business services. So year over year, 14,000 new jobs, but you can see they're almost the new jobs, 143,000 professional and business service, professional, scientific, and technical services jobs versus a loss of $133,000, administrative jobs. And again, you can see the loss in jobs is actually over 150,000 administrative jobs that were partially offset by waste management and remediation services. So businesses are over the last year have gotten leaner, laying off administrative staff in order to save money. Okay, now let's look at. Now we're gonna kind of go over to the asset side of life and look at the median home prices. Okay, which something I started doing I think a couple of months ago. So median sales prices, houses sold in the United States as of that's right. These are only updated quarterly. So this is going to be the same, unfortunately, as last quarter. I'm going to go ahead and skip this and if you want to look at that, go to last month's economic echoes. So let's look at a more local basis. Here we go, U.S. housing market, and this. Okay, so the average home value as of now basically is up 2.6% year over year. And the average house goes pending in about 3 weeks. Okay, so now let's look at some specific locations. Let's look at Los Angeles. Okay, Los Angeles, in terms of price increases, lagging the overall a little bit at 1.9%, but still starting from a much higher base. So would you rather have a 1.9% increase of over almost $1 million or a 2.6% increase of whatever it was about, 300 or 400 and something thousand, right? So people are still making a lot more money off of their homes in Los Angeles than they are in other areas of the country. Okay, and let's look at I think it's Omaha, Nebraska. I usually look at. So Omaha, Nebraska, average home price a little over $276,000, up 2.2%. So not bad. And then let's look at Miami, Florida. Okay, Miami, Florida, $583,000, up 6.4% year over year, right? Now, it's interesting because it's taking longer to sell houses in Miami, and that may be in part because housing prices have gone up much faster, over double the national rate. Okay, so it's good that your house is going up, but it's making it harder for people to buy houses. So that can make a difference as you, if you're living in Miami and thinking of selling your house. Likewise, if you're thinking of moving to Miami and buying a house, that it's taking so long may give you some market leverage. Okay, so that's and you can, all these links will be in the show notes. So if you want to look at your particular location and locations where you're interested in moving to, this Zillow tool is a nice one to play around with. Okay, so if you are not an owner, so then maybe you're going to be a renter. Okay, and if that's the case, so then let's see, here we go. Okay, so rental rates in key markets, it looks like a lot of rental rates are trending down. In all of the markets they've got here, you see, well, New York, they were essentially flat. Atlanta down, Miami down, Orlando down, Dallas down, Los Angeles down, all of these lower rates. So let's look at Los Angeles more closely. Okay, so month over month change, rents went down $5, but year over year change went down $39. Okay, they're still pretty high, almost $3,000 a month. And interestingly enough, rental properties, there's been a big increase in rental and properties renting for over $5,000. Okay, you can see there's almost nothing, very little under about $1,800, and certainly nothing under $700-800. Okay, now let's compare that to a market like, let me see if I can find Omaha. Okay, so in Omaha, look at this. So still a fair number of properties under $600 and a lot starting at $700, right? So, but rents did go up, and year over year, rents are up $100 in Omaha, Nebraska. Okay, so in lower rent locations, the rents are going up, probably because people are moving there in order to get lower rentals. So the cost to rent an apartment in Omaha is roughly half of what it is in Los Angeles. Okay, and now let's look at Miami. I think I saw that. Yeah, here's Miami. Okay, click through. Okay, so in Miami, rents are on par with what they are in Los Angeles. You see the same phenomenon where there's a big number of rentals at $5,000 or more. Having said that, rents in Miami, Florida dropped $100 month over month and $200 year over year. Okay, so Miami is starting to see a scaling back in the cost to rent there, which for renters in that market is good news. For building owners, obviously, they're not particularly happy about that. All right, and the last thing we're going to look at today is the home price to income ratio. Okay, and let's see. Okay, well, actually, we don't have new data for this, but I do like to show this chart anyway, and I'm going to take just a minute or two to talk about it. And because I want you to, we haven't been talking about these issues for as long as things like consumer price index and unemployment and such. But take a look at historically from around the year 2000. Okay, here's the year 2000 right about here. Okay, median home price to median income is a little over 4. Okay, so this line right here is 4. So you can see they're between 4 and 5 from the late 1950s all the way until about January of 2002. So for over 40 years, housing affordability was, home prices were 5 times or less, in some cases even less than 4 times median household income. But since the year 2000, they've stayed pretty much between 5 and 7. They did briefly around 2011 drop below 5 for just a few months, but since then they've been in the 5 to 6 range, and now they're above 7. So we are experiencing really I should open this up so you can see. So you can see. So here's around the year 2002, after which they stayed in the 6 to 7 range, and now more recently they've been above 7 for several months. So we are witnessing very unusual levels of housing, shall we call it, inaffordability. So really, the cost of the cost of a home relative to income has doubled. Now, there have been lots of explanations given for that. One is that the average house is bigger, and so you're getting more money. I mean, you're getting more space, and more amenities in the house. And that may very well be the case. However, of late, if you've been following the housing market, you've noticed that builders they're building smaller houses now without as many amenities in order to bring down the ratio of median home price to median income and make housing more affordable. And that is going to be very important going forward. When you think about it, to get back to the kind of ratios that we had for 40 plus years between the late 50s and the very early 2000s, income would have to essentially double, right? And think of, in terms of inflation, what that's going to do. What that's really saying is there is a tremendous housing shortage. Okay. So that if there were more houses available to buy, more supply, prices would come down. Okay. And here in California alone, I think the estimate is we're short somewhere between 600,000 and 1 million housing units, or some huge number like that. Okay, so this is a supply side issue, and that's what's driving this lack of affordability in houses. Okay. Now, it also, interest rates are higher than they were for about a decade and a half. But mortgage rates today at around 7.5%. Historically, those are not high mortgage interest rates. Okay. The interest rates we had that were down around 3-4%, those were historically low interest rates. And those are pretty unusual. Usually mortgage rates are around 6, 7, 8%. That's not at all unusual. Okay. So again, the housing affordability situation is really one of insufficient supply. And so we need to see more houses being built, and they need to be built in a way that they're not piled on with so many amenities that the average family can't afford them. So those are the economic echoes coming from October, as we look at them here in the sort of 2/3 of the way through November. And this hopefully helps you understand why you're feeling the economic pressures or experiencing economic issues the way you are. So again, all of these links will be in the show notes, and so you can check these out. I encourage, just take 15, 20 minutes to look at some of these things and see, for your particular situation, what is the relevant information you need to have. Because by looking through these, you can lower the anxiety over economic issues by understanding, okay, here's what's going on, and here's why I'm experiencing life differently than maybe what I'm hearing in the news media or hearing, through social media, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a worthwhile thing to do once a month. By this time of the month, the new economic data is out. That's why I do this usually in the second half of the month. And so you can get a clearer picture on what is the state of your economy. So thank you very much for joining me. And if you liked this show, please pass it along to your family and friends, and see if it's something that they will enjoy, find relevant to their life. I do this to help lower anxiety and bring greater economic understanding for all of us. And because I think if we do have a clear understanding of what's going on, we need not be so nervous about where things are going. So if you're not a subscriber, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel, The Way to Wow Shows, and would love it if you would be a subscriber, and that way you'll always know when we're going live for a new episode. And okay, so now for the rest of the week, which is tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific time is my show Jiggers' Place, and we'll be having a cocktail and talking about Earl Durr Biggers and the great detective Charlie Chan, one of the most well-known fictional detectives of all time. And so we'll sit back and have a cocktail and talk about that, and have a little bit of relaxation as we head into the end of the week. And then next week on Monday at 10 a.m. is my show, Trusts and Estates Weekly. And my guest is going to be Hillary Cooper. We're going to be talking about preparing for downsizing. Now, you may be saying, wait a minute, deja vu, I thought you already did that. Well, we planned to do it a few weeks ago and had a bunch of technical difficulties, and so the show never came off. And so Hillary and I are going to essentially redo the show. So please join us on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And then on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And then Thursday of, I'm sorry, not Thursday, Wednesday of next week, a week from today, will be the next edition of People Making Money. And then on Thursday next week, because it is Thanksgiving Day, I will be doing a special Thanksgiving Day broadcast at let's see, when am I going to do it? I think it's going to be at 10 a.m. In honor of Thanksgiving Day. So I invite you to join me for that as you head into your preparation and your day watching, I don't know, the Twilight Zone marathon or the I Love Lucy marathon or football or whatever you're doing, and having a lovely feast with your friends and family. So thanks so much for joining me. Always appreciate you being with me, especially those of you who join me live. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day, and signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my bell. Courage at all